That sounds good.
Yeah.
I like to dig into sort of the finer points around contract negotiation for the benefit of our listeners, our audience who, perhaps haven't engaged an outsourced manufacturing partner just yet. We have a lot of folks who are, R&D, preclinical companies who are going to be traveling down this road. So let's talk about that for a little bit. When it came down, Jerry, post vetting process, we're dialed in. We like what Forge has got going on. We know they're capable. Now let's start hammering out some details in terms of what they're going to do for us and what we need them to do for us that perhaps they haven't seen before. What goes into that process for you, Jerry, in terms of, I guess the execution, not the execution, but the forging, if you will, of the contract?
Yeah. I mean, we find this, so it's not too dissimilar to a CRO. We're going through that process now, and you get wide ranges of pricing for the same activity and outcome. Mm-hmm. And then it's a matter of it's vetting through that process, right? And we not only had our internal experience, but we relied, as I mentioned earlier, we brought in some independent consultants who had good pattern recognition on costs and variability and trends and habits of certain CDMOs in terms of how they charge, how they not hid costs, but where the hidden costs were. So we as we whittled it down, we had a good idea of the range from a negotiation from a cost standpoint. And then we also, it's not just negotiating price, but it's negotiating what's involved in services and along the way. And so we were able to continue to refine that. I think I mentioned that earlier, refine the statement of work, but also refine the contract along the way. So we became confident that we were within a reasonable range. And at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, price is not the final decision, because we could get the cheap, if we went with the cheapest and it didn't work, we'd be out of business. So I think from a pricing standpoint, we were able to get there, and from a work included and detail, we were able to get pretty much what we needed. Of course, there'll always be changes later. I'm sure we've made a number of changes to the work since then. Yeah. So that was a good thing. And then frankly, Forge was young and hungry, and they in a good way, they were aggressive, and we sort of, I can say that now, John knows it. We sort of leveraged that to get a better deal. We were this poor little biotech company with a really cool, innovative technology. Wouldn't it be great if Forge, if you manufactured our product for us? And so I think we were able to trim the edges a little bit there.
The salesman being sold.
That's right.
John, what's your appetite for and I Jerry, maybe you can weigh in on this too and speak to any, I don't know if you want to call them customization requests or proprietary requirements that, like I said, perhaps aren't cookie cutter like you'd see in a traditional biologics manufacturing agreement. So one, were there any sort of special requirements going into the engagement that John and his team had to mull over whether they could meet?
John, you want to take that? Because I'm
happy to, Jerry. And maybe there's a broader statement to this too, is I think, Jerry said it best, as we're an emerging CDMO, and there are a lot of them, right? We know there is a lot of good talent out there, a lot of great organizations to choose from. Where I think though, where some of the larger ones especially tend to get caught up is the formality of the deal making business. And I think where we get lost and where we can lose good technologies is rigidity this early on. I think, the way Jerry said it, we were very hungry to have great technologies with good management teams come in and really to have high, probability of success moving into IND. We really looked at these constructs very carefully and, trying to give advice early on, hey, sequencing looks a little off in these particular sections. If we're asked to do that, we're happy to do consulting up front if it means, the ability to get to work with these clients. So, in Life's case and others, we have good optionality for flexibility on multiple fronts. And obviously there's a business to run, so we have to maintain certain margins and cover costs. But, we took a tack, Mac, where we're, not only we try to be very transparent, we include pass-through costs in our numbers. We don't charge specific management fees and things that don't look like real charge items. Those are things we didn't care about, when we worked with CDMOs in the past. Or there's small fine print to add 40% because pass-throughs. We want to make sure, one, the pricing is very transparent, so it's straight through. And yeah, we absolutely negotiate, on the front end, especially with our early partners, about terms and things like that, just because we think we want a good science through the shop, and why don't we get them there? And if you get a number of those heading into late stage and then potential commercial, you show them a good relationship, you're all under one roof. I want then Jerry to bring his next program to me, right? So a lot of gene therapy companies work on a platform, right? And so if I have multiple products that are running the same manufacturing process with a different gene of interest, that's less quality work because the batch records are the same and the release criteria is similar. The PPQ runs at the end of this are very straightforward. The CQAs during the process or so it's more repeatable work for us that we can deliver on really precisely, but it's really opening the gate to that later, larger opportunity that we really thought about at Forge. So, for us, that means that there's some flexibility on front where we can stay on top of, the margins. I think that's the best way that we create relationships early and grow the business. And it's been successful. Frankly, we just, moving through our 50th client now that we've just picked up recently, and really able to grow the business base because of that philosophy. So, this deal and others, try to work with the client, find the best outcomes, perform DOE studies, try different opportunities. We can do, assays developments, things that aren't on a typical platform only approach. These are example things that we can do to a la carte to help the development process along on top of the original negotiation work we do.
Right. Yeah. Jerry, what's your best advice, like I said, for folks who are in your position on your org chart but haven't done this before?
Yeah. So I think it's one, you have to have an outstanding internal head of CMC, and we have one in Michel Wattier. He's been doing it for 20 years, gene therapy and other areas. He knows his stuff. That said, I would highly advise bringing in outside consultants to help you run the process internally, because when you're in a small biotech, that's time away from the day-to-day operation, and it's worth a little bit of investment to help run a more fulsome process. I think we owe it to our investors. I think we owe it to the board and the company and the success of the project to run a fulsome process and learn and go through that. It's a little extra work up front, but when you start with that, as we started out 12 to 15 months ahead of time and whittle down, we had a high degree of confidence. And when it was time to pull the trigger on the milestone event, as I talked about earlier, we knew it was Forge we wanted to work with. And it was just a matter of finalizing the contract. And so we had little wasted time in the end because we had a lot of confidence in our decision. So I think that's something, if I'm speaking to other CEOs or other execs or other heads of CMC, don't be afraid to bring someone in to help in the process. It's worth every dollar spent. When you're talking about an investment for us, that was a substantial proportion of our remaining cash, right? To go out and invest in the manufacturing. So that's my biggest advice. And then I would say also, really understand, one of the larger CDMOs may be the right place for certain companies, but understand what your culture, your internal talent, and how that matches up with your potential partner. One final thing we can talk about, but I think is important, and I think too often, and this is something to self-reflect on companies and how to keep yourselves accountable. We always want to push and, not blame, but hold the CDMO or the CRO accountable. But there's also internal processes within your own company that if you're not communicating with the CDMO, how do you expect them to fully help you and solve problems? So I think we have a great team that takes that very seriously. If something happens, I had a discussion with our senior VP of CMC today, and I said, what do you really like? What are the one or two best things about working with Forge? And he said, it's a true partnership. And he said the project manager's top notch. And that's where it falls down. If you don't have the senior exec within your company having a open and honest relationship with the project manager on the other side, everything breaks down, right? Everything breaks down, because typically problems aren't with people in the day-to-day operation. It's typically process and relationship and communication at a higher level. So that's the next thing that has to happen. And that's accountability on both sides of the equation.
Yeah.
I think that's where sometimes small companies like mine, they make a mistake and you're so busy day to day and you're limited staff that you forget about those important parts of what a partnership. It's a two-way partnership, not a one-way partnership.
Right. And I've got a couple questions for you on the partnership angle and what that looks like, from a day-to-day execution standpoint. But before I go there, you made an interesting point, Jerry, and I might be making this up in my head, but it seems to me. So you said, hey, this is a significant portion of the remaining cash that we have at this stage in our company that we're going to spend. We're going to spend money on Forge. Is there sort of an inflection when you sign on with a CDMO? Obviously, you do that at a very important stage in your company when there's some confidence that you've got something that's manufacturable, clearly. Is there an inflection or like a nuance there, like where when you spend that money, it might be a catalyst to bringing in more money? Does it have an impact? Like, does this decision have any impact on your investment community, on the capital that you raise next?
Well, I think it does, even though it's not bringing you to like a clinical endpoint, value inflection point. One, it demonstrates, because you wouldn't start the manufacturing unless you were financed to cover your day-to-day clinical development operations, but also your non-clinical development operations plus your manufacturing. But I think it gives confidence to future investors that they're going to walk into a situation where they have material for preclinical and phase one, right? Mm-hmm. That they're not having to make that investment. So that's risk. It's both from a cost and time perspective, but also from a development risk perspective, that when they come in, that is all taken off the table.
Yeah.
And so that's how we've positioned it. And I think it's, if I look at risks in biotech companies, time, money, and execution, and that takes something major off the table, particularly in the gene therapy. Right? This is not simple manufacturing.
Yep.
Yeah, Matt, maybe just to add to Jerry's point, it's not uncommon for us to be on with our clients' investors. I think CMC, as they know, being one of the biggest challenges in advanced therapies, in gene therapy notably, they want to feel confident that we're a good partner and that we know what we're doing, and also some of our historical experiences. So it's an interesting point Jerry makes, although we always talk about, sort of non-clin endpoints and clinical endpoints and trial designs and enrollment rates. I think they recognize, especially in this field, CMC needs to be well buttoned up with, regulatory vetting for us to make a substantial investment. So not an uncommon ask, even at the CDMO front.
Yeah. All right. I'm glad there was some substance to those answers, because I didn't know if that question made any sense at all.
No.
So the partnership thing, what is that? Jerry touched on it, right? Like he said, like, he asked his CMC director, what's important here, and he said the partnership, and you got a top-notch project manager. What does that look like on the day-to-day for your head of CMC, Jerry, and for your team that's working, John, your team that's working on Jerry's project? How accessible are they to one another? Are the doors open? Can Jerry and his head of CMC, stop in? Jerry already told us that he likes to snoop around your break room and observe your employees going about their business.
You didn't know that, right?
Yeah.
Which I don't blame you one bit.
But to get on the badge.
Yeah.
But what is that like? What's acceptable in terms of transparency and access to what's going on at Forge?
Yeah, and I think it's an important relationship builder. Every CDMO has different rules. Some are very stringent, and some are very more collaborative. We tend to be more on the collaborative side. So there's certain levels of ways we work at Forge. Everyone is assigned what we call a client relations partner, who is the project manager that Jerry is referring to. They're also assigned an internal PMO. So we actually have an internal project manager who sort of manages the project internally. We have someone who's the liaison with the client. And then they work collectively to make sure we have consistent and frequent communications. What I believe in the case of life, there's a weekly call where they, keep up on, especially in times of heightened manufacturing or development. They may change cadence times depending on, different parts of the development, but we try to make sure that we're having regular communications, transparent communications. So if there is an issue, we need them to know right away. And then we can work through the problem together. one of the worst things you can do as an organization is to go off and try to figure it out and then go tell the client, right? That creates just a distrust that nobody wants to manage through, and it changes the tone of the relationship. So we make sure we try to do that, quite openly. We do have a fairly, I think, liberal PIP program, which is a person in plant. We do encourage our clients to be here during major operations and view the process. We have angles you can actually watch visually. There's camera angles like we have, and closed circuit cameras to watch. But it gives them the ability then to observe and see us in action, how we work, ask questions, and sort of be there when we're live during sort of very critical parts of the process. I get that. Like being a CEO of a small biotech before this, you really want to be close to where your critical risk points are. So, we obviously make sure we can give that option to clients to be able to do that. And then we try to meet on routine JSCs. I think that's where decisions can be made. It's a bit more formal of a meeting, formalize the communication of data updates, next steps, how we are working together, feedback for Forge, the things you like to see done better. That's a great place for me and the CTO and the CRO to really sit and listen and hear about how the relationship is growing, or if there are really good things, take that learning and use it in other clients. So it's a great way for us to learn more about interactions with our trusted partners that come in. So that's the format, Matt, how we try to work with clients and try to maintain that. As I mentioned, it can sort of evolve over the course. If they're in the middle of their trial and they're dosing patients and we're really not on the hot plate for the moment, we may meet on a little less regular basis, but we do keep in touch during those times as well. Make sure we're just fulfilling the needs of the program. And then we also use those opportunities to ask, do you have a next program? And if you're interested in working with Forge again, let's start some pre-planning there, because how it is, queues can be long sometimes. There could be some opportunities. So we like to get ahead of those and try to make sure we're meeting their needs for timing and their boards and their investors' needs as well.
Yeah. Jerry, anything to add there?
No, I just, because I've been part of the joint committees, and what's nice, it is more formal, and you're giving project updates. And so in addition to our SVP of CMC, we have, our CSO, our Chief Scientific Officer there, and myself as the CEO. So it's a business update, it's a process update. And what's nice, even in those situations, right? I think the last time we were there, we were able to identify a challenge, right? That was on the table. And it just, organically turns into a brainstorming session. Or, our chief scientific officers, good, very, very good at problem solving, right? And before you know it, she and John were having a discussion, and I think within a day we saw that ended up not being much at all, right? So because you're constantly running into, this is the nature of our business in biotech, whether it's clinical development, whether it's HR, or whether it's manufacturing, it's constant it's constant speed bumps and questions and challenges that we have to solve. And you build a better relationship that way. So I think that's I'm not sure that's only Forge doing that, but I think it's an important part of the process. And if I were to speak to other execs, it's important that you invest the time and energy to build those relationships and keep yourself involved at that level.